Okay, last time I told you about the archives, the databases, the gatekeeping, the slave registries, and the wall that is 1817. Well, today I'm telling you what comes after the wall, the names I've been able to confirm, the documents that I found, and the people who keep finding me, and the question that's pulling me physically towards Jamaica. When did the land in Manchester become ours? Let's start with the names. Here is my paternal grandfather's lineage as best as I can piece it together right now. So starting with the oldest, I've confirmed Thomas Byfield Priddie. His son is Charles Nathaniel Preddie, then Simeon Preddie, and then Luther Preddie, my grandfather. I've also just been told there's a James Byfield Priddie somewhere in this line, but I'm still trying to figure out exactly where he fits. And these names didn't come to me all at once. They came in pieces from FamilySearch.com, from handwritten christening records, from what my grandfather and my father had kept for years, and increasingly from people finding me on Instagram who carry these same names in their own family trees. This is where things start to crystallize. So through Instagram, and I'll come back to that, I've connected with the great-granddaughter of my great-grandfather's sister. And she confirmed something I've been trying to verify through documents alone. So here's the line as I have it now. Thomas Byfield Priddie and Elizabeth Biggs had Charles Nathaniel Priddie. Charles Nathaniel and Carolyn Thompson had Simeon Priddie. Simeon and Mary Anson had Luther Priddie, my grandfather. That's 4 generations. And that's where the name Biggs enters the story. In these old Jamaican records, you start to notice something about how names work. Maternal surnames often reappear as middle names in the next generation. So you might find a Thomas Biggs Priddie, not because Biggs was his father's name, but because his mother was a Biggs. So Thomas Byfield Priddie's mother was a Byfield. The middle name carries the maternal line forward in a way that the official record never does, directly. And there's another layer. I've been told that Biggs and Byfield were names that were often interchanged within the same community. So families living in proximity, farming the same land, their names bleeding into each other across generations. That tells me something about what kind of community this was. So they're interconnected. They're rooted in the same soil. Now here's where it gets complicated, and I want to be honest about what I know and what I don't. I found a record of an Elizabeth Biggs listed as a frou mulatto, which is the term used in colonial records for someone who was half black, half white, as of November 1813. She's connected to the Hope Plantation, baptized in Clarendon at Rectory House, and she appears in records alongside a Thomas Alpress Preddie, and together they had children, including a John Preddie and an Adelaide Preddie, born around 1810. But here is the problem. This cannot be the same Elizabeth Biggs who gave birth to Charles Nathaniel Priddie roughly 30 years later. The timeline just doesn't work. So there's a generation in the middle that I'm missing. What does seem clear is that Thomas Alpress Priddie had children with multiple enslaved and formerly enslaved women. And I want to say there are so many Thomases in this family tree. I've already found 2 other Thomas Alpress Priddies. One had a child in 1891 with someone named Ellen, and this is almost certainly a different branch. The Preddie tree is full of Thomases, and I'm learning to be careful. What I believe is that Elizabeth Biggs, whoever she was in relation to that earlier record, represents a bridge between the formerly enslaved and the first free Black landowners in Manchester. And this is the thread that I'm pulling. And now, the detail that stopped me completely. While sharing this research on Instagram and on Substack, I heard from someone about a community in South Manchester, Jamaica, called Preddie. A community named Preddie in the exact area where all of these Preddies seem to originate. Before I go further, I want to talk about the spelling for a second, because in the earliest records I've found, the name isn't spelled Preddie, it's Priddie. So somewhere between the early 1800s and now, it became Preddie. And that kind of shift is common. Clerks wrote what they heard, names were anglicized, phonetically transcribed, occasionally just guessed at. Same family, different hands, different ears across different decades. So Preddie becomes Preddie, and Preddie becomes a place. And they are still there. So Charles Nathaniel Priddie had brothers and sisters. Those siblings had children, and those children had children, and many of their descendants still live in South Manchester today. In and around that same area, a whole network of Preddies rooted in the same soil their ancestors worked. From 1855 onward, the archives list the Preddies consistently as laborers, which tells me that they were working the land, whether they owned it outright, rented it, or were tied to it through post-emancipation arrangements. I'm still piecing that together. But they were there, generation after generation, in the same place. And that kind of rootedness doesn't happen by accident. Something kept them there, and I want to know what. Which brings me to another thing that I still cannot fully answer. When did the land in Manchester become ours? So I know that land in South Manchester was once owned by Thomas Hersey Barrett. I know my grandfather, Luther Preddie, owned land there. Still does. I know his father and grandfather were in that same area. I know the Moravian Church and other religious communities like SDA helped formerly enslaved people access land after emancipation through apprenticeship, through purchase, through the slow, complicated work of building something from nothing. But the actual transfer, the deed, the date, the name, I haven't found yet. To find it, I need the National Land Trust of Jamaica, which I've already been in contact with, and the National Library of Jamaica, where historical land maps and deeds are held. But honestly, I think it requires me to actually go, to be in Manchester, to walk the land, to talk to the Preddies who are still there. Now, I want to pause and say something about this process because it has genuinely surprised me. I put this research out there into the world not knowing what would come back, and what has come back was people. Preddies in Canada, in the UK, in the States, reaching out to say, I recognize those names and I think we're connected. The great-granddaughter of my great-grandfather's sister found on Instagram. My uncle runs a high school in Maypen, Manchester, and person after person who has reached out to me knows of him. The community is smaller and more connected than I ever realized, and the story is not just in the archives. It is living in the people. So here's where I am. I still need to find where James Byfield Priddie fits in the line. I still need the land transfer records. I still need to understand the full story of Elizabeth Biggs and the missing generation between 1813 and Charles Nathaniel. And I need to go to Jamaica. I need to go to the National Library. I need to go to the land. I need to go to Maypen and Manchester and Farm and Asia, to the community called Preddie that is still there, still rooted. still waiting to tell me something the archives can't. The archives have taken me as far as they can from here. There's a big part of the story that is on the ground. Next time, we switch sides entirely. My grandmother's lineage, and that is a whole other story. I'll see you there.